For years, the medical world told us something that turned out to be completely wrong, that the adult human brain cannot grow new neurons. You are born with all the brain cells you will ever have, and from there it is just a slow, inevitable decline. But here is what the science actually shows now. Your brain can grow new neurons well into your 70s, 80s, and beyond. And there is one specific thing you can do that directly triggers this process. It is not a supplement. It is not a brain training app. It is exercise. Welcome to Longevity Lab. I'm Claire.
And I'm Robert. Claire, this one already sounds like it is going to change something I do every day. I have got to tell you, the idea that we just lose brain cells and cannot replace them, that was a belief I have carried with me for decades. I remember doctors telling me exactly that. So you are saying that science has completely reversed course on this?
Completely reversed. And the implications for preventing dementia and Alzheimer's disease are enormous. The discovery is called adult neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons in the adult brain. For a long time, the scientific consensus was that neurogenesis simply does not happen in humans. But starting in the 1990s, researchers began finding evidence that it does happen, specifically in a region called the hippocampus.
The hippocampus, that is the memory center, is it not?
Exactly. The hippocampus is critical for learning, memory formation, and spatial navigation. And it is also one of the first regions to shrink and deteriorate in Alzheimer's disease. So the fact that this region can grow new neurons throughout life is a game changer. And the most powerful natural trigger for this process is physical exercise. A 2022 study published in the Journal of Physiology followed over 100,000 participants across multiple decades and found that individuals with higher levels of cardiorespiratory fitness had significantly larger hippocampal volume and a 28% lower risk of developing dementia.
28%, that is enormous.
It is enormous, and here is what makes this so compelling. This is not a small pilot study. This pattern has now been replicated across hundreds of research projects around the world. The evidence is robust. Exercise literally changes the structure of your brain.
Okay, so I have to ask because I know a lot of people listening might be thinking what I used to think. Is this just about getting more blood flow to the brain? I always assumed the brain benefits of exercise were about circulation, more oxygen, more nutrients, and that is why it helps.
That is a perfectly reasonable assumption, Robert, and it is one that even many doctors have held. Blood flow certainly matters, and it is part of the picture. But the mechanism goes much deeper than that. When you exercise, your muscles contract, and they release a protein called BDNF.
BDNF.
That stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Scientists sometimes call it miracle grow for the brain because it acts like a fertilizer for neurons. BDNF crosses the blood-brain barrier and stimulates the growth and survival of new neurons in the hippocampus. It strengthens the connections between existing neurons and protects them from damage. So we are not just talking about better circulation. We are talking about literally building new brain tissue.
So my muscles are sending a signal to my brain to grow new cells. That is incredible. It is like the body has its own built-in brain repair system, and all I have to do is activate it by moving.
That is an excellent way to put it. Your muscles act as an endocrine organ. They release signaling molecules that communicate with your brain, and BDNF is the star of the show. A landmark study from the University of British Columbia found that regular aerobic exercise increases the size of the hippocampus by about 2% per year in older adults. Typically, the hippocampus shrinks by 1 to 2% per year in sedentary individuals after age 60. So, exercise is not just slowing decline, it is actually reversing it.
Reversing it. That word matters. So I am not just slowing the loss, I am rebuilding. At 64, that is the most hopeful thing I have heard in a long time. But let me ask you a practical question. What kind of exercise are we talking about? Because I have heard everything from just walk more to you need high intensity interval training. There is a lot of conflicting advice out there.
And that is a great question because the research does point towards specific types of exercise for brain health. The majority of the studies on BDNF and neurogenesis have focused on aerobic exercise, activities like brisk walking, running, cycling, swimming, dancing, anything that gets your heart rate up and sustains it for a period of time. The sweet spot in terms of duration appears to be at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity per week, which breaks down to about 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week.
150 minutes. Okay, that is actually doable. That does not feel overwhelming. I think a lot of people hear exercise and picture themselves needing to join a gym or run a marathon. But 30 minutes of brisk walking most days, that is achievable.
It is very achievable. And what is really interesting is that the research suggests consistency matters more than intensity for brain health. A 2023 meta analysis published in Neurology found that the frequency of exercise was more strongly associated with cognitive benefits than the intensity of any single session. So, a daily 30-minute walk appears to outperform a single intense 2-hour gym session on the weekend. The brain seems to respond best to regular, consistent stimulation.
That makes sense. The brain is not a muscle you can just work out once a week and see results. It needs regular activation. But I do want to ask, is it just aerobic exercise? What about strength training? I have been doing some resistance work because I heard it was good for bone density as I get older.
Strength training is absolutely beneficial too, and this is where we need to dispel a myth that it is only cardio that helps the brain. Resistance training also increases BDNF levels, though through a slightly different pathway. The muscle contractions during strength training stimulate the release of insulin like growth factor 1 or IGF-1, which also supports neurogenesis. A 2021 study in the British Journal of Sports Medicine found that combining aerobic exercise with resistance training yielded greater cognitive benefits than either type alone. The combination appears to be optimal.
So the ideal is both. Some days of walking or cycling, some days of lifting weights. That is a balanced approach. And look, I will be honest, I used to think strength training was just for bodybuilders or young people trying to look good at the beach. But the science on this is clear. It is for everyone, especially as we age.
Absolutely right, Robert. And that is an important misconception to correct. Sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass, begins as early as our 30s and accelerates after 60. Maintaining muscle is critical, not just for mobility and independence, but as we have just discussed, for brain health. The muscle-brain connection is direct and powerful.
Okay, so we have established that exercise grows new brain cells through BDNF and that both aerobic and resistance training matter. But now I want to get to the question that I think is on a lot of people's minds, especially people my age or older. If I have not been exercising regularly for decades, is it too late to start? Can my brain still benefit, or have I missed the window?
This is such an important question, and the answer from the research is unequivocal. It is never too late. A 2020 study published in the journal Neurology followed sedentary older adults who began a 6-month exercise program. The participants were between 60 and 80 years old, and none had exercised regularly before. After 6 months of consistent aerobic exercise, brain scans showed significant increases in hippocampal volume compared to the control group. The brain retained its capacity for neurogenesis decades after the participants had been sedentary. The brain's plasticity, its ability to change and adapt, persists throughout life.
That is genuinely moving. The idea that a 75-year-old who has never exercised can start walking and literally grow new brain tissue within 6 months. That should be front page news. Why is this not more widely known?
I think part of the reason is that the old paradigm that the adult brain cannot grow new neurons was so deeply entrenched for so long. It takes time for new scientific discoveries to filter into public consciousness and into medical practice. The first solid evidence of adult neurogenesis in humans emerged in the late 1990s, but it was not until the last decade that the evidence became overwhelming. And the fitness and wellness industry has not always done a good job of communicating this. They often emphasize appearance, weight loss, muscle definition, looking younger, when the most profound benefits of exercise are actually happening inside at the cellular level in your brain.
That is a really important point. The wellness industry sells us the idea that exercise is about how we look, but the science says it is about how we think, how we remember, and whether we can stay sharp and independent as we age. That is a much more compelling motivation, at least for me.
And the research backs that up powerfully. Let me give you one more piece of evidence that I find particularly striking. It comes from a long-term study called the Whitehall II study, which followed over 10,000 British civil servants for more than 30 years. The researchers found that individuals who engaged in regular physical activity in midlife had significantly lower rates of dementia in late life, even when controlling for genetics, diet, education, and socioeconomic status. And here is the finding that surprised me most when I first came across it. The protective effect of exercise was independent of ApoE4 status.
ApoE4, that is the genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's, is it not?
Exactly. ApoE4 is the strongest known genetic risk factor for late-onset Alzheimer's disease. People who carry 1 or 2 copies of this variant have a significantly elevated risk. But the Whitehall II data suggested that regular physical activity reduced dementia risk even in ApoE4 carriers. Exercise does not eliminate genetic risk completely. That would be an overstatement, but it does appear to provide a meaningful buffer. Your genes are not your destiny.
Your genes are not your destiny. That is a powerful statement. And it brings me back to something you said earlier, Claire. Dementia is not inevitable. I think that is the core message here. So many people, and I have been one of them, carry this quiet fear that cognitive decline is just a matter of luck, that we are either going to get it or we are not, and there is nothing we can do. But the science says we have real agency here.
You have real agency. And that is the message I want every listener to take away from this episode. Cognitive decline is not random, and it is not inevitable. There are evidence-based actions you can take that directly and measurably protect your brain. And exercise, consistent, regular, moderate-intensity aerobic exercise combined with some strength training is one of the most powerful tools we have.
So let me try to summarize this for our listeners, and you tell me if I get it right. When we exercise, our muscles release BDNF, which acts like fertilizer for the brain. BDNF crosses into the brain and stimulates the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus, which is the memory center. This process, called neurogenesis, was once thought impossible in adults, but we now know it continues throughout life. Aerobic exercise like brisk walking is particularly effective, and about 150 minutes per week, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, is the sweet spot. Adding some strength training provides additional benefits, and it is never too late to start. Even people in their 70s and 80s can grow new brain tissue with consistent exercise.
Robert, that is an excellent summary. You have captured the core mechanism, the recommended dose, and the hopeful message about neuroplasticity. The only thing I would add is a note about consistency. The research is clear that regular daily movement outperforms sporadic, intense workouts for brain health. The brain thrives on consistency. So, if you are someone who has struggled to maintain an exercise routine, start small. A 10-minute walk after lunch, 5 minutes of body weight exercises in the morning. Build the habit first, then increase the duration. The most important variable is not intensity, it is showing up day after day.
Start small and be consistent. I love that. And I think one barrier for a lot of people, especially older adults, is the fear of injury. They think if I start exercising, I am going to hurt my knee or my back or something else. What does the research say about that balance between protecting your brain and protecting your joints?
That is a really thoughtful question, and it touches on something important. The key principle is that movement should be appropriate for your individual fitness level and any existing conditions. Low impact aerobic activities, walking, swimming, cycling, elliptical training, provide the brain benefits we have discussed while minimizing stress on joints. Water based exercise is particularly excellent for people with arthritis or joint pain because the buoyancy reduces impact while still providing the aerobic stimulus that triggers BDNF release. And of course, if you have an existing condition or have been sedentary for a long time, that is definitely a conversation to have with your doctor before starting a new exercise program. A good physician can help you design a safe plan.
That is a responsible point. Always talk to your doctor. But the message is not be afraid to move. The message is move safely, and if you need guidance, get it. Do not let fear of injury become an excuse for complete inactivity, because the evidence is clear that doing nothing carries its own serious risks.
Exactly right, Robert. And I want to share one more study that I think brings this all together in a very concrete way. It was a randomized controlled trial published in 2023 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA. The researchers took 300 sedentary older adults and assigned them to one of three groups. Group 1 did aerobic exercise only, 150 minutes per week. Group 2 did strength training only. Group 3 did a combination of both, 90 minutes of aerobic and 60 minutes of resistance training per week. After 12 months, all three groups showed cognitive improvements compared to the control group, but the combination group showed the largest gains, a 34% improvement in executive function scores compared to baseline.
34% improvement in executive function. What exactly does executive function mean in this context?
Executive function refers to the high-level cognitive skills that allow us to plan, focus attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks successfully. It is the kind of brain function that lets you manage your finances, follow a recipe while cooking, navigate an unfamiliar route, or organize your week. It is critical for independent living. And this study showed that a specific doable exercise routine produced a 34% improvement in just 1 year.
That is life-changing data. 34% better at the very skills that keep you independent. That is the difference between needing help with daily tasks and managing on your own. And the protocol was not extreme, 150 minutes a week, mixing walking or cycling with some basic strength work. That is accessible to almost anyone.
Accessible and evidence-based. And this brings me to a related myth I want to address. There is a pervasive belief in the wellness industry that you need to do brain games, crossword puzzles, Sudoku, specialized apps to protect your cognitive health. And while mental stimulation is certainly beneficial, a growing body of research suggests that physical exercise is far more powerful for actually changing brain structure. A 2022 review in Nature Reviews Neuroscience compared the effects of cognitive training versus physical exercise on neurogenesis. The conclusion was clear. Physical exercise is the most robustly supported intervention for stimulating neurogenesis in the adult human brain. Brain games may help you practice specific cognitive skills, but exercise literally builds the biological infrastructure.
So the crossword puzzle is fine, but the walk is essential. That is a great way to put it. I have spent money on brain training apps over the years, and it sounds like what I really needed was a pair of walking shoes.
That is a very cost effective reframe. And to be fair, cognitive engagement does matter. Learning new skills, social interaction, reading, all of these are good for brain health. But if you had to choose one intervention based on the weight of the evidence, exercise would be the clear winner. And it is free.
Free and available to almost everyone. Claire, before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you said about BDNF being like Miracle Grow for the brain. I have heard that term before, but I did not really understand the mechanism until today. Can you give us one more analogy to help people really visualize what is happening in there?
Absolutely. Imagine your hippocampus as a garden. Over time, without care, the plants in the garden start to wither. Some die. The soil becomes compacted and less fertile. This is what happens in a sedentary brain. Now imagine that every time you go for a brisk walk, you are watering that garden and adding fresh fertilizer. The BDNF released by your muscles is that fertilizer. It enriches the soil, helps new seeds germinate, and helps existing plants grow stronger roots and branches. Over weeks and months, a garden that was sparse and declining becomes lush and vibrant. New plants are growing, old plants are healthier. That is neurogenesis in action, and the beautiful thing is that your brain's garden can be revitalized at any age. The soil does not lose its capacity to support new growth.
The garden metaphor really helps. It makes it visual, tangible. You can imagine the process happening. And I think that is important because one of the challenges with brain health is that we cannot see it. We can see our muscles get stronger. We can see weight change on a scale, but the brain's improvements are invisible day to day, even though they are real and measurable. So having that image, a garden being revitalized, gives people something to hold on to while the invisible work is happening.
That is beautifully said, Robert. The work is invisible, but the evidence for it is robust. And the payoff, maintaining your memory, your independence, your ability to recognize your loved ones and navigate your world, is immeasurable.
And that brings me to my personal takeaway from today's episode. I have been a fairly consistent walker, but I have been inconsistent with strength training. Honestly, I thought of it as optional, nice to have, but not essential. After hearing this, I am going to commit to 2 strength sessions per week. Nothing extreme. Bodyweight exercises, some resistance bands. But I am going to be consistent about it because the data on the combination approach is just too compelling to ignore.
That is a fantastic commitment, Robert. 2 strength sessions per week, combined with your regular walking, puts you right in that combination group that showed the strongest cognitive benefits. And for listeners who may be starting from a different place, remember the core principle. Start where you are. If you are currently sedentary, a 10-minute daily walk is a meaningful step forward. If you are already walking, consider adding a second movement type. The goal is progress, not perfection.
Progress, not perfection. That is a great rule for health in general.
It really is. And that brings us to today's rule. The research shows that your brain can grow new neurons throughout your entire life. And the most powerful trigger for this process is consistent physical movement. The brain you have tomorrow is shaped by the choices you make today. And the evidence is clear. You have more control over your cognitive future than you have been led to believe.
That is empowering, truly empowering. If today's episode gave you a new perspective on what exercise can do, not for your waistline, but for your brain, please subscribe to Longevity Lab. We release a new science-backed episode every single day, and we are committed to giving you the evidence without the hype. Hit the bell so you do not miss an episode. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone who needs to hear that dementia is not their destiny.
Thanks for listening. I am Claire.
And I am Robert. Move your body, grow your brain, and we will see you tomorrow.